This free step-by-step video comes to you directly from Haynes. You can complete more than 200 jobs on this vehicle when you purchase the complete online manual at Haynes.com.
Apply the handbrake. Chock the rear wheels to prevent the vehicle from rolling. Raise the front of the car and support it on jack stands.
Remove the wheel for the drive axle being replaced. Unstake the drive axle hub nut with a punch or small chisel. Loosen the drive axle hub nut with a large socket and breaker bar. To prevent the hub from turning while you're loosening the drive axle nut, wedge a pry bar between two of the wheel studs. If an assistant is available, having them depress the brake pedal while loosening the nut will also work. Place a floor jack under the lower control arm to support it for when the damper fork is removed. Remove the damper fork pinch bolt. Remove the damper fork. It may be necessary to tap the fork off of the shock absorber. Remove the cotter pin from the castle nut on the lower ball joint stud. Although not shown, it is a good idea to loosen the nut a few turns instead of removing it completely. This will prevent the ball joint stud from abruptly popping out when it is separated from the steering knuckle. Using a puller, separate the lower control arm ball joint from the steering knuckle. Remove the drive axle hub nut. Support the outer end of the drive axle with a piece of wire to avoid unnecessary strain on the inner CV joint. Swing the knuckle hub assembly out and away from the vehicle until the end of the drive axle is free of the hub. If the drive axle splines stick in the hub, tap on the end of the drive axle with a plastic hammer. Carefully pry the inner end of the drive axle from the transaxle, or, on models so equipped, the intermediate shaft. Using a large screwdriver or pry bar positioned between the transaxle or bearing support and the CV joint housing. Support the CV joints and carefully remove the drive axle from the vehicle. Pry the old spring clip from the inner end of the drive axle and install a new one, if reinstalling the old or overhauled drive axle. If installing a new drive axle, make sure there is a new spring clip installed. Lubricate the differential or intermediate shaft seal with multi-purpose grease. Raise the drive axle into position while supporting the CV joints. Insert the splined end of the inner CV joint into the differential side gear or the intermediate shaft, pushing it firmly in place. To aid insertion, the gap in the spring clip should be facing down. Make sure the spring clip locks in its groove. This can be checked by grabbing the inner CV joint housing and pulling out. It should remain in place. Apply a light coat of multi-purpose grease to the outer CV joint splines, then pull out on the steering knuckle assembly and install the stub axle into the hub. Insert the stud of the steering knuckle ball joint into the lower control arm. Install the castle nut and tighten it to the specified torque setting. Install a new cotter pin through the castle nut and stud. Never loosen the nut to align the castellations with the hole in the stud. Always tighten the nut slightly to allow the cotter pin to be inserted. Install the damper fork fully onto the shock absorber lower shaft, tapping it in place if necessary. The gap at the top of the fork must meet up with the notch on the shock absorber shaft. Insert the damper fork pinch bolt. Insert the damper fork to lower control arm through bolt and nut. Raise the lower control arm to simulate normal ride height. Tighten the damper fork to lower control arm nut to the specified torque setting. Tighten the damper fork pinch bolt to the specified torque setting. Install a new drive axle hub nut and, if applicable, a new washer. Tighten the hub nut securely, but don't tighten it to the actual torque specification until you've lowered the vehicle to the ground.
Install the front wheels and lug nuts. Lower the car to the ground. Then, tighten the wheel lug nuts to the specified torque setting.
Tighten the new drive axle hub nut to the specified torque setting. Using a hammer and punch, stake the nut into the drive axle shaft groove.